Hello everybody, thank you for joining me for this third in this series of Me and God and a bit of Kabbalah. This section is about loving God, Avas Hashem. However, although it sounds like a very cozy and romantic topic, it is actually a very demanding concept, and like everything in Torah, the more we look at this, the more we find that our normal understanding of things is subverted for something altogether different and on a higher plane. So let's dive into the concept of Avas Hashem, love of God, and we'll see just where it takes us. First of all, let's deal with what God is not about when it comes to us loving Him. We are not supposed to simply love God because of a circumstance or an event, or because of one of His qualities which we like. So if something good happens to us, something that we like, that in itself needn't be a reason for loving God. Rather, we are expected to love God independently of anything that happens to us, irrespective of how God is and what happens to us, what He lets happen to us, what He does to us, even to death itself. However, that's not to say that we can't love God. Most normal people have a capacity for love. Some people love themselves or their lives. Some people love their children or their descendants even more than themselves, because this is their legacy and their future. So we do have, most of us, the power of love within ourselves, but how do we use that to love God? Now, there is actually a big clue to accessing the notion of Avas Hashem, love of God, in Shema, where the second line says, V'ahavta es Hashem elekecha, you will love the Lord your God, v'chol levavecha, with all your heart, v'chol nafshecha, with all your soul, v'chol meidecha, and with all your might. This is preceded by Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that famous line, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And the fact that the second line, V'ahavta, and you will love, begins with a v, and, suggests that it is linked to Shema Yisrael. That first line, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, naturally leads on to us being able to love God. That's what the Vav is for. So how do we understand this? And more importantly, how do we do it? Well, Rambam teaches us how to do this in Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, part of Mishnah Torah, his monumental halachic work based on the Talmud. And this is what he says there. What is the path to attain love of God? When a person contemplates God's wondrous and great deeds and creations, and appreciates His infinite wisdom that surpasses all comparison, they will immediately love, praise, and glorify Him, yearning with tremendous desire to know God's great name. As King David stated, my soul thirsts for the Lord, for the living God. Psalm 42, verse 3. So when we say the first line of Shema, Listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, we're thinking about God. We're remembering that He's there, that He is our God, and that He's just one. So much so that other things barely exist beyond Him. And when we do that, naturally we understand that God is so great, God is so present, that it's almost impossible not to love God as a result of that. This idea is reinforced by the fact that the four-letter name of God used in the Shema line, the one written as a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, actually means that God is the one who grants existence to all that He has created. It is this fact about God, that He nurtures and sustains us and the whole of creation, that we are to focus on as we say Shema twice daily. Once this mighty idea is understood, it is possible for us to love God b'chol levavcha, with all your heart, and we recognize that any earthly love that takes its place in our heart contradicts and mars our love of God. Uv'chol nafshecha, God requires us, if necessary, to lay down our lives for Him. Well, if we love God enough, then we understand that loving Him by laying down our lives is not really such a big deal, because we understand how great He is, how great His love is, and how much we can love Him. Uv'chol meidecha, if we need to give away all our money to serve God, we're required to do that as well. Well, that's actually fairly obvious. Of course, if God doesn't require our lives, He just requires our possessions. Of course, we would gladly yield them to Him for love of Him. And in truth, the rest of the first paragraph of Shema continues with this theme. It says that the love of God must be on our hearts, that we should talk about Torah, God's word, all the time, when we sit at home, when we walk on a journey, when we lie down, when we wake up. We're always thinking about God. Men have to make special signs about God on their arms and their heads with the tefillin to dictate our actions and our thoughts. And we write a little miniature Sefer Torah in the mezuzah on our doorposts, so that any place that belongs to us is dedicated to that love of God and reminds us of his presence and our bond with him. In fact, this is what Rambam says, again in Mishnah Torah, Hilchos Tshuva. What is the proper degree of love? That a person should love God with a very great and overwhelming love until his soul is bound up in the love of God. Thus, he will always be obsessed with this love, as if he is lovesick. A lovesick person's thoughts are never diverted from the love of their beloved. They are always obsessed with them. When they sit down, when they get up, when they eat and drink, they are thinking about the object of their love. With an even greater love, the love for God should be implanted in the hearts of those who love him and are obsessed with him at all times, as we are commanded, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. This concept was implied by King Solomon when he said, Ki chilas ahava oni, I am ill with love for God. Indeed, the totality of the Song of Songs is a parable describing this love. What about if somebody has tragedy in their lives? This makes loving God perhaps a little bit harder, or perhaps a lot harder. Chovos Halevavos says that there was once somebody who was so poor that they were stricken with hunger, unable to afford proper clothes, unable to light their home. And this person said to God, My Lord, you have starved me, you have left me naked, you've made me sit in the dark, and you have taught me your strength and your greatness. If you burn me in fire, I will only love you and rejoice in you the more. This is an incredibly grand and mighty thing to say. And what it means is that this person has reached such a clarity of perception of God's greatness and kindness that they understand that everything that happens to them, however excruciating, however disappointing, is an act of love from God. And whatever happens, they just love God back the more. That is not something that everybody can achieve. It's an extraordinarily elevated way of seeing oneself and God. But such a concept exists, and if we just know about it and can work towards it throughout our lives, that's already a step in the right direction. Chovos Halevavos likewise says that there was a certain man who lived in a desert, and somebody met him and asked if he was not afraid of being eaten by the lions that roamed in the desert. And this man replied that if God saw him afraid of the lion, he would be ashamed before God, that he would have neglected God's love for a moment and thought that God would not help him through this dangerous situation. That's not to say that the average person should put themselves in a dangerous situation. But if our love of God and our trust in him is sufficiently clear and unequivocal, then nothing is dangerous anymore. That's how great our bond with love, a bond of love with God can be. Likewise, the biblical prophet Job said in chapter 13, if God kills me, I will hope in him all the more. If we recognize God's greatness and that everything is a sign of his great wisdom and love, then we can take anything from him as an act of love and respond with love. We've already seen that love for things of this world contradicts the proper love for God, b'chol levavcha, with all your heart. We can deal with this by weaning ourselves off our addiction to the physical, intellectual, and emotional pleasures of this world, and accustoming ourselves to living with God as the only reality. By gradually reducing other loves in our lives, our souls become more refined and less distracted, and we are able to make more progress in this. That's not to say that we shouldn't love other people, but we have to love them in a way that fits with our love of God. So, for example, the Torah says we should care for other people. So when we care for somebody else as a mitzvah, then that love we have for that person becomes part of our love of God. If we eat not just to enjoy the food, not just to be full, but rather to sustain our bodies so that we can serve God better, then that act of eating is part of our love of God. So it can be simply a question of adjusting our attitude to all that we do, and then we can sublimate everything in our lives into the love of God, including our love of other people. And indeed, we are supposed to be loving. We're supposed to love our spouses, our parents, our siblings, our children, our friends as best we can. And if we think that this idea of loving God unconditionally and seeing everything as an act of love from God is beyond us, well, that's not the case. Because every Jew has the heritage of Shema. Every one of us is supposed to understand that sequence of a clear and beautiful perception of God, leading to a pure and mighty love of God that is unconditional and constant. We all have the legacy of Shema. We're all called to this great love. And if we can't do it today, let's at least make a start, and maybe one day we'll make it. Thanks for listening.